to Monday Night Live. Today's edition of Monday Night Live is an old friend of ours, Justin Urquhart Stewart, BBC commentator, financial guru, and a thoroughly interesting man. Everything that Justin tells us is straight talking, no holds barred. Justin, welcome. Thanks for joining us once again. Justin,
there we are. Carry on.
Yep. First question for you, Justin. Let's start with the UK. Let's start with what's going on with the government, with Rachel Reeves, and perhaps the economy.
Well, it's fascinating because we've got our budget coming up later this month. And what you're seeing at the moment is typical sort of politicians throwing out all sorts of stories. Remember the days when actually budgets used to be secret, and if you actually leaked anything at all, or implied leakage, you could end up going to choky. It was one example of that. But now, no, it doesn't do anything alike. So they're coming up with all sorts of weird and wonderful stories just to see, we're just testing to see actually how popular they are or not. But frankly, that's almost beside the point. The big problem the government's got is no one trusts them. There's no confidence in what's going on. And this is the budget she should have done first of all, which is let's get the bad news out of the way. And all she's done is actually get herself in a more difficult position. The question is she going to have the strength of character to actually turn around and say, you know, that budget we did before, it's rubbish. And therefore, because things have changed, and as Maynard Keynes wonderfully said, if the facts change, so do I. What do you do? And she's got every reasonable chance to say the facts have changed. Should pick your facts carefully, and therefore adjust your policy accordingly. Basically, what's going to happen, there's going to be more tax coming. The choices you've got are relatively small, because our taxation system is so bloody complicated. But there are only three main taxes: income tax, national insurance, which is income tax by another name, one or two variations, and VAT. Even corporation tax is relatively small compared with those three. So you can spend all your life twiddling around with taxes on houses and things like that. There's still going to be pretty small stuff. And she's going to have to not find actually fill a bowl of 10 billion, whole of 10 billion. Actually, the figure is probably coming up closer to 40 billion. So she's going to have to dump some of her policies, and which will make them yet again just seen as being unreliable. Mind you, it's pretty difficult to find any politician in this country we regard it as reliable. So a difficult situation. So it's not going to be easy. But the bit I find frustrating is the lack of knowledge and understanding, not just of the politicians, but also some of the senior Treasury officials' willingness to change and adjust to actually look how you can grow an economy without having to pour huge amounts of borrowed money into it. There are all sorts of schemes that have been tried. Some have been quite successful. We have enterprise investment schemes. But basically, what they do is governments can offer guarantees for loans or part loans. And of course, they're running up a liability, but it doesn't get called in until the business goes bust. And on the working assumption they don't all go bust, it's actually quite a good way of actually being able to encourage companies, encourage investors domestically and internationally. And of course, the joy of it doesn't actually involve government money. So there are some things they could do there. And also, as I have to spend quite a bit of time trying to teach the media here, it's not all doom and gloom. There are some areas which are still doing really rather well. And you have to look at the tech sector, nowhere near, obviously, the strength of the states. One of the problems here, we're very good at coming up innovations of technology. And our dear cousins come along and say, that's marvellous, but it will grow a lot faster in California. And we start them and then they go off. So you can look at the tech hubs around the country, and I can identify 50 quite easily. And there you're seeing growth companies there, real growth. A lot of them are startups. Yes, it's high risk, but the development of technology is so exciting there. And so encourage that. Of course, the great thing is that mostly they're not in London. They're all over the country, even places where you wouldn't expect it. Belfast, some very dynamic things going on there. And what they need is not just access to capital, but the confidence to make sure, because there's no shortage of money. I'm not talking about government money, but investment money. But investment money is not going to go in unless there's going to be more confidence, not just in the economy, but also the finances. And so that's one of the bits the government just don't get. It's not just trying to sit there and say, how do we balance the books? And having some argument with these people, say, well, remember, taxation does not create wealth. If you create wealth, it gives you opportunity to have some more taxation. It's the other way round. But sadly, some of our dear leaders don't seem to get that. And of course, other things we could be doing. I know we discussed before with old-fashioned taxes like stamp duty, which are utterly ridiculous. We brought it in so the Dutch could fight their war against the French. It wasn't even our war, but because we have King Billy married to Mary Stuart, and then we ended up with the Glorious Revolution, and he managed to divert investments, or sorry, taxation by introducing stamp duty to pay for the war of the Dutch against the French. Brilliant. So it's nice. We don't just have wars ourselves, we pay for other people's. So stamp duty is really stupid because it's a preventer of money being spent and invested. What you want to find in situations like this is something where there's a multiplier, and a multiplier of when you spend something, what's the knock-on effect? And one of the key areas with stamp duty is property. And so if people are going to move house, well, stamp duty is a wonderful break to actually put you off doing that. And really, if you encourage more people to say, just get the housing market moving, then what happens when you move house? Well, the kitchen goes, the bathroom goes, the children, well, no, children don't go, unfortunately, but you end up spending more money with builders and appliance providers and things like that. And of course, what do? Well, they will employ people and they pay tax. Good heavens. And you start getting movement. And remember, we've seen this before back after the tech bubble and the banking crisis. In America, quite rightly, they focused on the key area to try and get it working again was the banking system, so you could actually get them out lending again, give people confidence so that Joe Schmo, Mr. and Mrs. Joe Schmo in Little Rock, Arkansas, shopping in Walmart with a pile of twigs known as home, now actually have the ability to be able to sell it again or buy something else or whatever, but getting more movement of money through the economy, velocity of cash in an economy. And these aren't very complicated things to do. And more to the point, they're actually pretty cheap for the government. EIS doesn't cost anything government to start with. And you can apply that to smaller companies as well. And also with stamp duty, it doesn't bring in a great deal of money, but its impact on individuals with their properties is very enormous indeed. So, yes.
Justin, do you think that the government's listening to advisors like you who are all saying this, get the property market moving, get rid of stamp duty, etc.? Or is it still going to be more of socialism? We've got to not tax the working person, whoever he is.
Unfortunately, I probably don't help because you just turn up as a city guest in red braces, and that's the last person they probably want to see. They say if you were running the place, it'd all go to the dogs. Actually, quite good going dog racing. But the issue is that it is the lack of experience with the politicians. That's the politicians one thing. It's the Treasury actually going find the civil service. That silly woman Liz Truss kept on going about the blob, which she was talking about effectively not so much indolence, but the ability to learn and change and adapt, particularly in places like the Treasury and the Home Office. And the Treasury, because you don't have people there who have got a depth of knowledge, because right about 10 years ago, they started introducing modern HR structures so that you stayed in your job for 3 years and then you went off to Foreign Office or Home Office, something like that. So you had people who were very bright, very experienced, but they lost the expertise, who really understood what impact there would be. So you then have a politician turning up who's only going to be there for 9 months anyway, probably. So the politicians doesn't know a great deal as to what they should be doing, relying on what the civil service is saying. But of course, you then find they don't have the knowledge. You then try and bring in people who from businesses, people who run businesses, finance businesses, and they're regarded almost as they've got horns on them. And it sort of say, well, what's in it for you then? We said, well, actually, it's funny for all of us. Actually, how do we get this economy moving? There are some sensible, well-tried levers that you can do, even if you don't have much money. And by the way, when you look at the money, people go on about the amount of debt we've got, which is huge, granted. But remember, one of the largest holder of UK government debt is the UK citizens. 24% of UK debt is owned by the government. So the government has borrowed the money, created the money off itself, and in effect has to get a coupon or a dividend twice a year, which actually works out at about £36 billion in interest, which it has to pay to itself. Does it make any sense at all? So in effect, what you could actually look at the debt, that amount, 23% of the overall debt, of 23% of the gilt market actually being owned by the government. You could almost, and you couldn't do, but you could almost sort of write one side of the balance sheet off the other and effectively be reducing your debt levels. I wouldn't suggest they do it because then you'd scare the markets and you'd end up doing a trust. But nonetheless, that can be done over time. But it also should actually give people, certainly those making decisions, a bit more confidence that yes, you might be near a cliff edge, but you're not teetering on the edge of it yet, unless you come up with some more stupid ideas like taxing
So
bonds.
the FTSE is at 9,703 today. Should we be selling any UK shares we've got?
Remember, all the markets, unless you actually love a bit of gambling, there's nothing wrong with that. The stock market can be used as a gambling tool if you so wish, but not for your pension money. The big return on your investments over time with the joys of compounding. It doesn't sound very exciting. It sounds incredibly dull, but that's long-term how you grow wealth. So if you've actually got companies which have been around for a long time, or even some of those really dull investment trusts, and there are about 8 or 9 of them now who've had a rising dividend for 50 years. Every single year. I have to say, the level of it was pretty low. But at that level of consistency just gives you an idea of how that can be done. And so you compound your money over time and look over the decades how that works. And that's how you then also help educate people with their own finances and their pensions, because nobody knows in this country how much money they need. Because no one taught them what to do. It wasn't in the school curriculum or anything. So it's extremely frustrating. And of course, people only really start finding out what they need when it's too late, at the wrong end of their career. So I have to say, Americans are far better at it than we are, but we are astonishingly bad with bright but not very in tune civil servants and, frankly, politicians who are thick as two short planks.
Let's turn to America as you raised it. I want to talk about America. I want to talk about China, Russia, and some of the wars that are going on. But let's go to America first. Factories are, I read this today that factories have got so much stock, it's just not true. And clearly that's Trump's tariffs. What's going on there?
Well, I would say Trump's tariffs are having an impact because the tariffs are a brake on an economy. Or it could break an economy, that's getting too far. But certainly, and I think it's probably where Trump's, again, a lack of understanding at all. If you start adjusting tariffs on the front end, funnily enough, it hits you on the other end when your trading partner starts actually reacting back to you. And what Trump has done is knocked over the complacency of the global economy, which is quite right. So someone had to do it and actually break that glass. But you've then got to replace it with something that actually then works. And by just saying we're going to ramp up tariffs to a certain level, which he knows full well he's going to have to back down on. But that's his sort of the way he likes to do his art of the deal to try and do it. But of course, it's that or not is not always necessarily very helpful if you've got to try and take a longer term perspective. And his perspective is, well, how long can I wait? Not very long before I can try and get the Nobel Peace Prize. For how many wars has he now settled? Actually, it's very strange indeed. One pair of companies, the countries didn't actually have a war, but I suppose if he just says there's a war, there probably would be.
So, okay, what about China then? Now, I used to work in Royal Mint Court, and that's going to be the Chinese embassy. It's a massive place. It will take about 10,000 people.
Also, well, underneath it as well, which is a bit they're really worried about, there's an awful lot of very serious power structure underneath it. And some of the supposedly very secure British data is there. But the kit that's underneath that Royal Court is really quite astonishing. It is a vast area. And of course, it's a compound with a huge, great, well, we remember, with the gates and things like that. It's perfect for a Chinese embassy. That's actually a really good message, particularly put that straight opposite the Tower of London, so you could accuse people in the embassy and chop their heads off over the road.
It's an extraordinary thing to do to allow them to have the embassy that size in the middle of London. I cannot believe that the Prime Minister's allowing it.
Well, it is one of the things that was agreed some time ago, but I'm just amazed that even with all the reaction, there hasn't been more action to try and seriously question the security for ourselves by having that embassy there and covering such an area, but also smack next to the City of London. And so I'm afraid I'm very suspicious of it, but I'm afraid it does show our lack of, I suppose, broader appreciation. It's a bit like then dealing with the rare earths, obviously, which people get very excited about because China's got all the rare earths. That's not true. There's one word wrong with rare earth. It's called rare. It's not actually that rare. It's not common. It's the processing of the rare earths that's actually vital. And if I remember correctly, it was an American stroke Dutch company that was really specializing in these of processing the rare earths. And that was great, marvelous company, which we all should have taken more notice of. Unfortunately, the Chinese bought it. And it's that technology and knowledge which now allows them to lead the race in terms of processing rare earths. So we can get rare earths from somewhere else, but if you don't have the ability to cost effectively structure them into the products you want, it's going to be really rather difficult. So again, lack of strategic thinking here, and realize what other people are doing around you. And in your game of poker, someone's just had a look at your hand.
So, how about Russia? How about geopolitical? It seems to be, since you were last on, the world's got a bit more riskier.
Yeah, it seems to be, doesn't it? It is honestly astonishing that when you look what you could depress yourself easily by going through a list of wars and horrific issues. What's happening in Sudan at the moment is just appalling. But there are other areas which don't get such coverage. Yes, we have a war going on in Europe, and you've got a position where Leningrad taxi driver is in a position where he can't go anywhere. The man needs to be toppled, but who's going to topple him? And much of that, who's going to replace him? And so he can't actually go back on anything at the moment. What's he going to tell? We will have this war, which was started by those Nazis in Ukraine. No, this wasn't even a war. It's a special military event. That's the wrong word. But he was trying to downplay it all. The injuries and deaths for the Russians side is now over 1 million. And which is really quite horrific. But the Russians can play a long game. Their economy is in a terrible state. Remember, Russia is not a superpower. It's a dangerous power. But in terms of its economy is worth round about 45% of the United Kingdom. You compare that, the sheer size of Russia, surely it's going to be more than that. Its economy is in a terrible state, getting worse, and now people are beginning to feel it. The citizens reading some of the more interesting magazines as to what's been happening, and they're feeling that pinch coming through. But again, what are you going to do? What can Putin do to actually then sort of losing face, saying we've had a great victory because we've got another 4 acres of Ukraine? So it's going to be very difficult. And we're now at the next level of saber rattling, which was inevitable, as it took so long, was when Putin would start making comments about his latest technology, a lot of which doesn't work, and particularly with regard to nuclear, because it's not so much actually intercontinental. No, just localize nuclear explosions and just start that process. Just put the fear of God into everyone and say, oh my God, they're going nuclear. It's going hot. Therefore, then you can hear it. Well, let the Russians have it. Why don't they just keep what they've got now? And the Ukrainians turn around and say, yeah, well, they're going to do what they did last time, which is come back in a few years' time and nick some more. What do you have to do to try and resolve this? Can they win the war? The answer is, well, they can make sure Russia loses it. It's a stupid comment to say. What it means is their economy is in such a bad state at the moment. Their exports, yes, of course, they've got their shadow fleet trying to export their oil, but the actual exports of oil have been declining dramatically. And the deals they've done with countries have been at such a discount. But he needs the money. We know where a lot of that money is, and a good, secure place who's got a fantastic level of expertise in money laundering, known as the City of London. So actually, are you now going to actually take some of that money to pay for the Ukrainian war? Now, there are all sorts of legal issues attached to that, but Russia needs that money. How much longer can they carry on before the economy gets into a really dire situation and it is felt by the population? And does someone then have the courage to be able to actually topple him over? With recent history, as we do, you have to go back to Yeltsin and that unstable period. You could find yourself going through that again. But the trouble is, we just don't know. The man is highly unreliable as an ex-KGB colonel. He's unreliable on the basis that you know what he's going to be telling you isn't true. I'm afraid he probably plays Trump really rather well. Maybe I'm being too rude about Trump, but be wary of Putin. And I'm afraid the only he's going to react to is proper strength. That does not mean sitting there saying, no, we're putting more planes into Estonia or something like that. But where there are violations, they are met with force going back as well. Now, this is a dangerous issue because does that escalate into something much more unpleasant? Or do we just sort of kowtow and say, well, it's only a local, it's not that important? And no, it is very important. And Putin, remember, has a history of this, where it was dealing with what happened in Georgia, and what's been happening in Moldova, and obviously just sneaking in to go and grab Crimea. Why not? So I'm afraid he will not be backing off anytime soon, not so much because of face, but he's got nowhere to go. And the best thing we can probably hope for is someone with a large sniper rifle to try and sort that out. But beware of unforeseen circumstances with that one.
That's not really happening at the moment, is it? There's two or three things there. The money in the Russian money in London is frozen, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Frozen.
That doesn't mean, though, that there isn't money which is actually slightly more liquid. And you've only had to see that when you look at, where was that? I think I mentioned to you down in Bournemouth, not exactly the most riveting place. You've got to be over 80 to qualify to actually get out of the train there. And it's fascinating. Bournemouth Football Club, and most people wouldn't even know they had a football club. And I remarked, I said, why is there a Russian flag outside it? Yes, because the Russians have bought the Bournemouth Football Club. And you could see how the transactions were going. The prices made were astonishingly inflated, and a classic bit of money laundering going on there. But for that, look at other areas where you can see they don't care how much it costs, as long as I can launder that money through the system. So there's no easy answer to that one, I'm afraid, except having the balls to turn around and say, this we will not do, we will not carry on with it, we will actually take action against him. If he's going to do nasty things to us, we've got to be prepared to do the same and show that we're prepared to do the same.
And what about the South China Sea? We talked about that normally. Nothing's really changed, has it? Taiwan still at risk?
Yeah, I mean, Taiwan, remember, they would regard Taiwan as being part of national China. And remember, Taiwan's actually been a very separate area, not just because of what happened after the Communist Revolution. But of course, many years they were actually seen as just a Japanese colony. And the Chinese keep on referring to it actually as this sort of quasi-colonial power by the Japanese. But actually, what you're seeing, of course, in South China Sea, continuation as we saw before, more bluster, but backed up with lots of concrete in the Navy. Remember, they managed to have one of the world's shortest wars with Vietnam, lasted 8 days, because it was all that was over to do with the Spratly Islands in South China Sea. But they managed to upset Vietnam, Philippines, Taiwan, Malaysia, even Brunei, and Indonesia as well. It's quite clever to manage to piss off all those countries at once. But they're all terrified, because if they do stand up against the dragon's a lot more powerful than they are individually. And so they've got to play their cards really very carefully indeed. And what's still encouraging, though, and again, something that doesn't get covered too often, their economies down there are growing. Their economies have changed shape. There is a growing middle class. I know that's some of my family. And you can just, I think the measure I was just tell you was actually the number of major stores in Jakarta. So go back 20 years ago, there were about 15 Westfield equivalents. Last time I was over there, we're dealing with over 70 of them. And Indonesians armed with their credit cards going off and spending money enthusiastically. And so most of ASEAN is actually in a much better position overall. But the thing they dread is, of course, does the Chinese economy slow, which it is, as it was started to resolve some of their key structural elements, such as their overproduction of property, which all sorts of issues related to taxation of that. But there is a bubble, some of which has already been bursting, but because it's run by the Communist Party, you don't really hear about it. Things only go bust in China when the party says you can go bust. But on the other hand, they still need to make sure there is increasing trade and growth. Otherwise, the population gets rather upset. And like all communist regimes, if the population get upset, your numbers are going to be numbered with that, going to be shortened quite significantly. So remember, China, yes, of course, the size of the economy is vast, but divide the value of that economy by its population, and you've got a value of about $3,000 per citizen. Compare that with the States, around about $60,000 per member of the. So yes, of course, it's big, but be wary of when people go on about its strength, because its financial strength is changing, but not as strong as most people think they are at the moment. But South China Sea is one of those trigger areas that could go off. because no one wants it to happen, but the Chinese, who produced this map with the red dot line, which no one had ever seen before. All it does is just draw dots in South China Sea. That's our area, apparently. Oh, and we can add 200 extra miles of as an economic zone beyond it, which actually takes you past Malaysia into the Andaman Sea. That seemed very rather odd. So be wary, and certainly my brother down in he lives in just off Singapore, actually one of the islands off Brunei, and increasing number of Chinese boats, they've been fishing boats, but gunboats actually seem to be taking more control of what's going on in some of the uninhabited islands. Why? Well, you can have a strategic base there to improve your electronic defenses, radars, and things like that. And the Indonesians will go along with it. Why? Because someone pays them to.
Okay. Well, Justin, we're nearly at the end of the official part of this this interview, this chat. One last tip for people watching this on YouTube or on the podcast as we head towards 2026.
Well, short-term tip then is we're going to be seeing some really dramatic moves in volatility in markets. Use that to your advantage, to your benefit. What do you actually try and buy to do that? Well, keep it simple. You buy an index or subsets of the index. The joys of ETFs, which are cheap as chips, and so long as they are transparent, so you can see actually what's in them and who's actually running it, because some of them are not the best quality. But that is a simple way of playing a market if you actually wanted to do some trading. If, though, that frightens you and you're far happy going to the horse racing for that, which I'd recommend. Actually, what you're seeing is them ignoring the sort of longer term issues, and that's what we need to be able to try and encourage more with that.
Just remind us what ETFs are.
Oh, sorry, exchange traded funds, which basically is a tradable tracker. Came out of California, which hardly surprising because some rather bright people say, "Hang on, I've got my investments in the Dow, and I've got actually it's cost me quite a lot with all my brokerage charges and all those sort of elements. Isn't there a better way I could do that?" And yes, there were some tracker funds, but they weren't that cheap. ETFs revolutionized all it, made it considerably cheaper. There was even one period where the one of the new launches coming through, they paid you to own it for the first year. You couldn't make it up, really, could you? So that's an area to look at. Simple indices funds at a low cost is your short-term, if you want to have a short-term punt. Otherwise, your portfolio hopefully is nicely balanced around the place, which is going to be the next fashion fad. Don't worry about it. Ignore it. If you've got a spread all over and globally as well, take a longer term view, and that to me is the best way of trying to look at, try and manage. Don't try and be too clever. What you can do though is just have maybe some pocket money on the side. So when you see certain markets getting out of kilter, that's just gone too far. Good, go in and buy that. And the definition of taking that risk and willing to take the answer is you could afford to lose it. None of us want to lose it, but that sort of high risk element which you could use to your benefit. But be careful with it. It is high risk. So if you're going to put that in there and if it goes horribly wrong, it's not a disaster. So do your own play money, not with your pension.
Justin, thanks for joining us again. I hope you'll come back and join us in 2026. And can I ask members of Monday Night Live to give you the usual vote of thanks in the normal way? And will you stay on and answer a few questions off the first recording?
Yes, of course. I can't be too long because I'm supposed to be madam's flying off to Florence. So I've got to organise some things, probably the cats.
Okay.
But press on. Happy to do so. Stay a few minutes.
Okay.